The snow hadn't stopped falling since the Raven arrived. In Winterfell, the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the hearts of every man and woman who stood behind. Ned Stark. The letter had been short, brutal. Lord Eddard Stark is charged. With treason, he has confessed. His punishment is death. But what they didn't know in King's Landing was this: Ned Stark had sent a message too, not through ink and paper, but through loyalty, trust, and rage. Robb Stark had not yet marched south, not yet, because in this version of the tale, Eddard Stark never confessed. When faced with Joffrey's madness and the crowd screaming for blood, Ned raised his head high and spoke the truth. I served the realm. I served Robert, and I will not bend my knee to a monster born of incest. Gasps filled the air. Face twisted in fury. The sword came down, but not on Ned's neck. Seer Barristan Selmy stepped forward, defying the Queen, halting the execution. Chaos erupted. Ned was dragged back to the cells, bruised but alive. Varys, watching from the shadows, knew this moment would change everything. He whispered to Tyrion. Tyrion whispered to Bronn, and the word reached the north before Ned's fate was sealed. This time, the north would not beg. They would rise. In Winterfell, Maester Luwin read the news aloud in the great hall. Your father has been imprisoned, not executed, but he will not last long. Robb Stark stood slowly, his hand clenched. Then we ride, he said. We ride with every man who remembers what honor is. But it wasn't just honor. The North remembered the Mad King burning Rickard Stark. They remembered Brandon's death. And now a Lannister boy sat on the throne, backed by a queen who ruled through lies and fear. Every northern house that had once bowed reluctantly now raised its banners high. The Starks, the Umbers, the More, even the reluctant Boltons. The rebellion wasn't just about saving Ned Stark. It was about ending the Lannister grip on the Seven Kingdoms. Whispered oaths spread like wildfire. The North remembers. Meanwhile, inside the Red Keep, things were crumbling. Joffrey's unpredictability turned even his allies cold. Cersei tried to play the game, but too many eyes watched her now. Sansa, broken and quiet, began to gather information. Littlefinger noticed. Varys listened. Arya, who had fled the Sept during her father's arrest, was no longer just a scared girl. With help from Yoren of the Night's Watch, she found shelter in the streets of Fleabottom, sharpening her anger into steel. She vowed one thing: her father would not die in a cage. As Robb Stark's army moved south, the Riverlands rose with him. Walder Frey, greedy and cunning, demanded promises. Robb gave him words, but not trust. Catelyn Stark went to her father, Lord Hoster Tully, and pleaded for men. The banners of the fish joined the wolf. Tyrion, Lannister, sent to hold the Vale in check, quickly realized the danger. He rode to King's Landing under the protection of his hill tribes, demanding to see his father. Tywin Lannister, cold and calculating, summoned his forces at Harrenhal. War was coming in this time. The Starks weren't just defending, they were attacking. Back in the Tower of the Hand, Ned was chained, tortured for information, but he remained silent. His mind wandered to his children, to Catelyn, to the cold winds of Winterfell. But he knew something now. Honor was not about bending to survive. It was about standing when everything told you to kneel. As the drums of war echoed across Westeros, a storm began to build. This was no longer Robert's rebellion. This was a northern reckoning. Fire would meet ice not through prophecy, but through rage. The river ran red at the Twins. Robb Stark's army had grown to nearly 20,000 by the time they reached the crossing. Walder Frey, old and sly, stood atop the battlements of his miserable towers, weighing his options like a merchant counting coins. He saw opportunity. Robb saw only a choke point. Catelyn whispered, "We must tread carefully. The Freys don't fight for loyalty, they fight for gain." A deal was struck, bitter on Robb's tongue. He would marry one of Frey's daughters, eventually. For now, they passed. The North was not here to bargain endlessly. Time was running out. Ned Stark's cell grew darker by the day, and whispers reached even the dungeon's King's Landing was preparing an execution. But this time, Robb Stark wouldn't arrive too late. Tywin Lannister had gathered his forces at Harrenhal, the burnt-out ruin still smouldering with old ghosts. He had no love for his grandson's idiocy, nor for Cersei's spiraling loss of control. He only cared for power. Tyrion, always the unwanted son, warned him, "You're fighting a war with wolves. They don't bark, they bite." As Robb crossed the Green Fork, scouts brought back news of ambushes. Lannister outriders had torched villages along the borders of the Riverlands. Bodies hung from trees. The message was clear for us. Robb answered by striking at night, burning supply lines and freeing captured villages. He wasn't just a boy playing war. He was becoming the young wolf. Far to the east, Arya Stark moved like a shadow. With Yoren's help, she cut her hair, dressed as a boy, and became airy. But her heart never forgot. Every Lannister face she saw filled her with rage. One night, she stood in an alley, watching two gold cloaks laughing over the death of a baker's daughter. She followed them, and in the quiet, plunged a stolen knife into the back of one. It was clumsy, it was messy, but it was her first kill. In the Red Keep, Sansa Stark began to lie. She smiled at Joffrey's cruel jokes. She nodded when Cersei spoke of loyalty, but behind her eyes, the fire grew. She overheard conversations in the horse plans of sending Ned to the Wall, or perhaps executing him in the square. She wrote a letter, carefully, secretly, and slipped it into a servant's sleeve. It was a risk, but it needed to reach Seer Barristan. Varys watched everything. "Power resides where men believe it does," he told Littlefinger, who only chuckled. "Yes, but chaos is a ladder." As the northern army neared the Whispering Wood, Robb devised his first true strike. Jaime Lannister had taken the field, smug and armored in gold. Robb sent decoys southward while sneaking his true force through the woods under cover of darkness. The plan worked. The Kingslayer, surprised and outnumbered, fought like a demon but was finally brought down. Robb didn't smile. He didn't boast, he just said, "Bind him. The war isn't over." At Riverrun, Catelyn held Jaime's fate in her hands. She wanted to kill him. Gods, how she wanted to. But her husband was still alive. Jaime was worth something. A Stark for a Lannister. A father for a son. King's Landing burned with rumors. Ned Stark's execution had been delayed again. Some said the Queen wanted it public. Others said Varys intervened. But the people were restless. Bread lines grew longer. The gold cloaks grew crueler. The city boiled. And then, in the early hours of a foggy morning, Robb Stark sent a raven. To the Queen, it said only this: "You have one moon's turn. Release Eddard Stark, or we take King's Landing, brick by bloody brick." The raven reached the Red Keep as the sun bled red over Blackwater Bay. Cersei read the note in silence, her face pale beneath her painted mask. Joffrey laughed when he heard it. "Let the dog come. I'll feed his head to Sansa. But no one laughed with him, not even the queen. The small council argued, bickered. Pycelle stammered about negotiation. Littlefinger suggested a trap. Very simply stared at the flickering candle on the table and said, "The North has teeth." In the cells beneath the keep, Ned Stark sat in chains, thinner than before, but not broken. Seer Barristan Selmy came to him in secret, speaking softly. "Your son rides for you. He's won battles, captured Jaime." Ned looked up sharply. Jaime Selmy nodded. "And the Riverlands stand with him. This is not over." Ned said nothing, but his eyes told the story. He had lived long enough to see death close. This was hope, fragile and dangerous. He must not rush the gates, Ned warned. King's Landing will burn its own to win. Back in the north, Winterfell had become a fortress. Bran, sitting in his father's chair, listened to reports. Wildlings stirring beyond the wall, strange shadows moving. But all his thoughts remained with Robb. Maester Luwin watched the boy, and saw not just grief but steel at the twins. Walder Frey began to stir uneasily. The Starks were winning, and he didn't trust winners. He had offered his bridge cheaply, but now he whispered to messengers riding for Casterly Rock. "A better offer, perhaps," he hissed. "I am not married to loyalty in Harrenhal." Tywin Lannister seethed. The capture of Jaime was not just a loss, it was humiliation. His legacy, his golden son, dragged in chains by a boy lord. He ordered Gregor Clegane to strike back. Villages were razed, innocents butchered. Let the wolves come south and find only ash. But that didn't slow Robb. It made him colder. By the time his army reached the Blackwater Rush, the camp was alive with tension. Men sang songs of the young wolf at night. Lords muttered by day. Should they strike the city now, lay siege, or wait for the Lannisters to break themselves? Catelyn arrived bearing news Sansa's letter had been received. Seer Barristan was secretly on their side, and Ned was alive, for now. The camp erupted with cautious hope, but Robb didn't smile. "Hope is a luxury. I want my father back, or I'll drag that lion child from his throne by the hair." Far across the sea, news had reached another listener. Daenerys Targaryen, newly widowed and holding 3 impossible dragons, heard whispers of rebellion in West, a northern uprising, a crack in the lion's wall. She watched her dragons breathe, smoke, and whispered, "When they tear themselves apart, I will return." Back in King's Landing, tensions snapped. Small folk rioted when a baker was caught, hoarding bread. The gold cloaks killed 10 to calm the street. A child's body was found crushed beneath a merchant's cart. Whispers spread. "The wolf is coming." Cersei summoned Tyrion. "You will go to Robb Stark," she said through gritted teeth. "Parley, offer terms." Tyrion tilted his head. "You fear him," she glared. "I fear nothing, but the people are hungry, the city's cracking, and your nephew is a damned idiot. Go, offer him back his father for peace." Tyrion left with a heavy escort, Bronn beside him. The journey was long, through forests still soaked in blood. When they reached Robb's camp, the silence was heavier than armor. Robb met him in the center tent. Grey Wind sat by his side, growling low. Tyrion bowed slightly. "Your Grace," he said. Robb raised an eyebrow. "A Lannister calling me that." Tyrion smirked. "The wind changes, my lord, and you seem to be holding it." Robb didn't smile. "You came to talk, so talk." Tyrion pulled a scroll from his cloak. "Your father will be released. Jaime too. Peace can follow. A truce. A line in the sand. Robb's eyes narrowed, and Joffrey, Tyrion sighed. A boy surrounded by wolves. How long can that last? Robb didn't answer. He didn't have to. The torchlight flickered in Robb's tent as silence fell after. Tyrion's offered Catelyn stood at her son's side, her eyes locked on the imp. "You offer peace," she said coldly, "but you still hold my husband like a prize horse." Tyrion didn't flinch. A trade. Ned for Jaime. Both sides walk. A way whole. Robb leaned forward. "And what of the butchered riverlands? What of the North's dead? Should we forget their blood?" "You're winning," Tyrion replied carefully. "But even victors can drown in their own pride. You think you want King's Landing? You've never seen it starve. You've never seen wildfires spill through the streets." Catelyn's hand rested on Robb's shoulder, gently. "We can't trust them," she whispered, "not with anything that bleeds." Tyrion placed a ring on the table, his own signet. "The Queen means to act soon. I say this not for her sake, but for your father's. Act too slow, and you may find only a corpse to trade." He left under guard, vanishing into the misty dark. In the silence that followed, Robb rose. "No more waiting. We march on the capital." The decision spread like wildfire. Horns sounded across the camp. The North was no longer threatening, it was coming. Robb left a portion of his forces to guard Jaime under tight watch and rode south, steel flashing in every hand in the red. Keep panic began to bloom. Joffrey grew more erratic. One moment demanding Ned Stark's head, the next screaming about dragons in his dreams. Cersei tried to hold the court together, but even the lords of the Reach began to eye their escape. Roots. The city smelled of rot and fear. Varys came to Sansa in the dark. "Your father may soon be free, but only if your brother moves faster than the Queen. Is he alive?" Sansa asked, barely breathing. "For now," Varys said softly. "But Cersei is sharpening the axe, and the king is restless. We must make them hesitate." Sansa appeared at court the next day, composed and fragile. She pleaded before the Iron Throne, her voice trembling. "Spare my father, your grace. He only acted to protect the realm." The court watched, silent. Joffrey leaned forward, smirking. "Beg again. I like it." Sansa knelt, tears in her eyes. But inside, a storm was brewing. Meanwhile, Arya had found a blade of her own. Not Nida lost when the gold cloaks chased her, but something sharper still, hate. She slipped through alleys, listened to whispers, and eventually found her way to the Red Keep's sewer tunnels. She knew where the cells were, and she was ready. Robb's army reached the outskirts of King's Landing within weeks. Banners flew high, wolves howling in the early morning fog. The small folk fled the outer villages. Wild rumors spread. Some claimed Robb could speak to wolves, others that he drank Lannister blood. But the truth was this: the young wolf had become a legend before he turned 18. Inside the city, panic turned to violence. The gold cloaks couldn't keep order. A bakery was stormed. A noble's house burned. "The wolf is at the gate," they screamed. "He comes for the lion." At the Red Keep, Cersei gave the final order: "Prepare the execution. If he wants his father, he'll watch him die." But Seir Barristan, long silent and proud, turned to her and said, "I swore to protect the realm, not serve a mad boy and a frightened queen." That night, he vanished from the keep. In the cells below, Ned Stark heard a familiar voice whisper from the darkness, "Father, He opened his eyes. Arya, she stepped forward, torch shaking in her hand. We're getting out. But even as they crept through shadows, the bells of King's Landing began to ring, and the wolf was at the gates. The gates of King's Landing groaned under the weight of tension thicker than the city's stone walls. Robb Stark stood outside the capital, armor smeared with dust and blood, grey wind snarling at his side. His eyes were fixed on the city's towers, not in awe, but in warning. He didn't come to beg. Inside the Red Keep, chaos boiled over. The bells that rang were not for peace, they were for death. Cersei's final order echoed through the halls. Bring him to the square. Let the North watch him fall. But Arya had already moved. She and her father crept through the tunnels, the stench thick but familiar now. Seer Barristan had opened the path, his last act of rebellion before fleeing the city. Ned was weak, his limbs aching from weeks of darkness and torment, but Arya's voice guided him. Almost there. Don't stop. Back above, Sansa watched from a tower window as the Lannisters dragged a man into the square. But it wasn't her father. Her heart skipped. They had a decoy. A man dressed in northern furs, head bowed beneath a sack. They want to bait him, she whispered. Robb wasn't fooled. He had scouts in the city. One returned just as the fake Ned was dragged forward. It's a trick, the scout gasped. He's still alive. He escaped with the girl. Robb's fury was ice cold. Enough games. He gave the signal. From the tree line behind the city, siege weapons rolled forward. Trebuchets aimed at the outer walls. Archers notched arrows. The ground shook as the northern army moved like one beast. Inside the city, panic erupted. The gold cloaks scattered, too few and too poorly paid to stand their ground. Small folk screamed, rushing to gates that wouldn't open. Fire broke out in the Flea Bottom. The city was eating itself from the inside. Joffrey screamed at his mother. Make them stop. Kill the prisoners. Kill them all. But Cersei wasn't listening. She was watching the gates, watching the end, and in the tunnels beneath the keep, Ned and Arya emerged into a hidden corner of the outer city. Barristan was waiting with 2 horses. Go north, he told them. Don't stop until you see the direwolves. Ned looked at him, confused. You're not coming. I've lived in too many king's shadows, Barristan said. I'll not serve a queen who rules through fear. My sword belongs elsewhere now. They rode back at the front. Robb gave the final command. The siege engines launched. Fire and stone crashed into the walls. Arrows filled the sky like a second storm. The first layer of defenses crumbled within minutes. Grey Wind was the first over the trenches, leading a line of northern berserkers who moved like winter itself, silent, unstoppable. The fight for King's Landing had begun. Tyrion, just returned, watched the carnage from a balcony. They always thought the north was quiet, he muttered. Now they'll hear it scream. The Lannister army, already stretched thin, tried to form ranks in the streets. But civilians clogged the roads, rioters looted the shops, and rebel banners unfurled from windows. The city wasn't defending itself. It was surrendering from the inside out. Sansa found herself swept into the tide of fleeing nobles. She saw a Night Dye trying to mount his horse, saw a scepter trampled in the chaos. She tried to reach the stables, but the crowd swallowed her. Robb's forces breached the outer gates by nightfall, and as the Red Keep loomed above the burning city, the young wolf raised his sword. No more kings, he whispered, only justice. Smoke. poured from the rooftops of King's Landing like a storm cloud choking the sky. The city, once drunk on power and gold, now knelt beneath ash and blood. Robb Stark moved through the broken gates, his army behind him like a tide. The Red Keep, towering above the city, looked less like a seat of power and more like a tomb waiting for its last lord. The Lannister banners had not yet fallen, but they hung limp in the heat, untouched by wind or hope. Inside the keep, Cersei sat beside the Iron Throne, her face blank. Joffrey paced like a mad hound, screeching orders no one followed. The gold cloaks had abandoned them. Even the Kingsguard were missing. Only Seer Marin Trant remained, silent and pale. Tyrion stood in the corner, watching his family unravel. He had tried to make peace, to stop this moment. But now, as the howls of wolves echoed in the distance, he knew it was too late. Outside, grey wind led the charge through the Red Keep's outer halls. The direwolf had become a myth. People swore he could smell treason, that his eyes glowed like fire. Robb followed close behind, sword drawn, cutting down the last defenders who still stood for a fallen crown dot at the great hall's entrance. The doors burst open. Joffrey turned, his eyes wild. "You can't come in here. I'm the king." Robb didn't even speak. He stepped forward, sword steady. "You'll hang for this." Joffrey screamed. An arrow from the side caught him in the chest. Sansa stood near a pillar, her hands still trembling. Her eyes didn't blink. "That was for my father." Joffrey collapsed, coughing blood, reaching for a crown that slid off his head and hit the stone with a sound like the end of an empire. Cersei didn't cry. She just stared at the Iron Throne, then turned to the bottle of nightshade she had tucked. In her sleeve, Tyrion lunged too late. She drank deep, her face crumpling not from fear but from bitter pride. As the silence fell over the throne room, Robb looked to Tyrion. The imp raised his hands. "I came to make peace. I'll leave with it. You helped my father," Robb asked quietly. Tyrion nodded once, "Not for love of you, but for hate of them." Robb lowered his blade. Arya and Ned arrived before the city was fully secured. When Robb saw his father alive, bruised but standing, he dropped to one knee. "I thought we were too late." Ned placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, you were right on time." The city was claimed by nightfall. The lion banners burned. The wolf sigil rose above the Red Keep for the first time in history. Robb Stark didn't sit the Iron Throne. He had it broken. He stood before the lords of the realm days later and said, "The North will never kneel again. We came for justice. We are not kings. We are Starks." The Riverlands followed. The Vale sent envoys. Even Dawn whispered respect. Sansa stayed behind in the city, helping restore what could be saved. Arya vanished soon after, heading west with a sword and a list. Tyrion rode south. No titles, no home, only thoughts of wine and what might have been. And Ned Stark, old and scarred, returned to Winterfell, walking slowly beneath the godswood trees with the wind in his hair. The war was over, the throne was gone.